And a very warm welcome to the LBC Book Club. We're here with you until 10 o'clock. I've got the author of The Craze, Their Life Behind Bars, is Robin McGibbon. Now, Robin, I always think, as a publisher myself, when I see a book that has got silver embossed letters on the cover, I always think the publisher has got great confidence in the book because they've spent quite a lot of money on the cover. So I hope it's selling well.
He should have confidence because it is a great book, and that is a subjective view, but, you know...
I think it's a very subjective view. You're the author. Now, how did you first meet the Cray twins?
I had a publishing company in the 70s. I'd left Fleet Street to form that. It was called Everest Books. And you've heard of the author Ken Follett?
I have.
He was working for me. I'd got him from the Evening News and saw the potential, published his first 3 paperbacks under a pseudonym. And one day he came into the office and said, "We've got Charlie Cray in the office. I think we should publish his book." and
you gulped?
Well, in Fleet Street, I had probably sub-edited many stories about the craze, excuse me, and written headlines. But to be quite honest, in 1975, which this was, they didn't really mean that much to me. So I had to be convinced that it was a book worth doing. And convinced I was, because Charlie Cray charmed me like and nobody that I've met since, really. He was dapper, he was in a lovely brown suit, crisp shirt, cufflinks, shiny shoes, very, very lovely deep brown voice, unlike the twins who had thin, reedy, horrible voices, really. And we published the book. But it was a bad book, because the twins hadn't admitted the murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie. And Charlie couldn't tell the truth. So he did it, as he would say, for a few quid, to earn a few quid. Because he had just come out of prison for his part in the, alleged part in the Jack the Hat McVitie murder. I didn't see Charlie again for 10 years. But then I was in Blonde's nightclub, celebrating the birthday of a page 3 model called Flanagan, Maureen Flanagan, who was there with George Best and various other celebs, and Charlie as well. Now, Maureen was a friend of the Craze. She had grown up with, she had been in Bethnal Green with them. She knew the mother. She did the mother's hair. She said, you published Charlie's book all that time, all those years ago. Why don't you meet the twins? Sorry, I forgot to say that Charlie asked me at that party to rewrite his book because he could now tell the truth.
Right.
Because the twins in the interim had admitted the murders. So we rewrote the book, me and my brothers, the proper version. Maureen said, now that you've done Charlie's book, why don't you meet the twins? You will not believe how different they are. So we went down to Parkhurst. She got me in, really, to see Reggie by saying that I was to be trusted and everything, because he said, "Oh, reporters don't like reporters. What makes you think I want to see a reporter?" So she said, well, he is to be trusted. He's working on the Daily Express now, and he's a sub-editor, and he's not a foot-in-the-door reporter, di-da-di-da-da. So we went down there to meet Reg. And I've got to tell you that the first meeting was very hairy, because on the train I'd written these questions, just in case it was a one-off and I would never see him again. He might hate me and I might be intimidated by him or whatever. So I wrote 11 questions. Why 11, I don't know. Maybe it ran out of time. But the first one was burning a hole in my pocket, and after the pleasantries, I decided to ask the question. And I leaned forward because the noise in the visiting room was quite high. Children running around, mothers talking, wives talking to their prisoner boyfriends or husbands. And I said, Reg, where did you bury the body of Frank Mitchell? And he went, eh? I said, where did you bury the body of Frank Mitchell? Eh? I looked around and the noise was still there. I said, where did you bury the body of Frank Mitchell? Everything went quiet, I promise you, everything went quiet. I felt as if every eye was boring into my back. And he said, I don't want to answer that. Next question. And I looked at my list, and the next question was, where did you bury Jack the Hat's body? I just didn't have the bottle as they say in the Mile End Road, to ask it. But we got through that, and we became as friendly as anybody could become friends with the... we were useful to each other.
In what way? Explain that.
He saw me as someone... Well, the reason he saw me for the first... in the first instance was because he needed a well-connected journalist outside. I'd had my own publishing company. I was now back in Fleet Street as a sub-editor. I knew most of the editors. I'd worked with most of the editors down the years. So he saw me as someone who could be quite useful, getting pro-craze stories in the papers that would earn him money.
You were his Peter Mandelson.
Next question.
But what do you put... I mean, I was going to say, what is the endearing appeal of the craze? But we all continue to be fascinated by them in a way that we're not about any other criminals. Why is that?
Do you know something? I was asking this. I've got a friend in Bromley, David Mears. He's a mechanic friend of mine, very nice guy. And he is not in any way a gangsterish type of person. But he is fascinated by the craze. He's 38 years old. He was born in 1973. And he saw the film. And he said after that he was just fascinated. He wanted to know more. So much so that when I did wrote Charlie Craze's book, I gave it to David to read. And it just changed his opinion of them. But the fascination was still there. So it's young and old alike. It's you know...
well, and particularly...
they were identical twins, Ian. That's basically why the legend lives on. If they'd just been ordinary brothers, I don't think, but they were identical twins, and it captured Fleet Street's imagination and the public's imagination.
Well, and particularly in the East End of London. I mean, even now in the East End, there will be people that say, well, there wouldn't be so much crime around here today if the craze was still here.
Well, that is a cliche, and it's often said, but in a way, I can understand why they say that, because people then were a bit worried to do things that were not right. You know, we hear now of ladies of 91 ending their lives being mugged. I promise you that if Ronnie particularly had heard that a little old lady had been mugged in the 60s, he would have taken some retribution without any shadow of a doubt. And I think that's probably why.
Do they talk much when you met them about their mother?
I've got to say this to your listeners, the twins were very, very different. Ronnie was sedated in Broadmoor. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. He was on Stemetal. He was charming, he was polite, he was courteous. Reggie was arrogant, cocky, knew it all. But both shared one thing. They did not want to talk about the past. The only time I got Ronnie talking about the past really in depth was when I did an interview on the record, and I did touch on the mother, and his face did brighten, and he said, I took my mother to meet Charles Boyer, who was a French heartthrob at the time. He took her to a club to see him, and his face showed that that's about the only time that they, you know, Reggie never talked about his mother, never talked about the past. They weren't big-headed. They didn't, when I say big-headed, they weren't, like, we did this and we ruled the East End. I never got that from them at all.
But presumably, I mean, you wanted to talk about the past. That was part of the reason that you were there.
I wanted to talk about the past very much, but it became very clear, very, very quickly, that wasn't on the agenda. The only time Ronnie went into the past in any depth was when I said to him that we ought to do a TV series. And he said, OK, I'll talk to you about the past for the TV series. But as soon as he started talking, it became clear that he would have to boast that we did this, and it quickly dissolved into nothing. I got an hour out of him, during which time he admitted the real reason, which is in the book, and on those tapes that you've got there, he admitted for the first time the real reason that he murdered George Cornell in The Blind Beggar.
Well, so interesting. You mentioned the tapes here. We've got. I mean, the tapes were released a couple of years ago, I think.
To tie in with the 40th anniversary.
It's actually a sort of CD box set, isn't it? It
Yeah.
says the Cray tapes, the voices of Ronnie, Reggie, and Charlie. I mean, it must have been absolutely fascinating to compile. Now, we were talking earlier. We mentioned the film, The Craze. I'm trying to remember who starred in it. It was Gary Kemp. Was it Gary Kemp?
Martin and Gary.
And
yeah.
Martin Kemp.
Gary played Ronnie.
What did the Craze themselves think of the film?
Thought it was absolutely appalling. They didn't see it for many months until it came out in video, but by then they had heard so much about it that, you know, anybody who knew them was telling them that it was just absolutely awful. And you spoke about the mother earlier. The mother, Violet, never swore. And the first thing that Billy Whitelaw, I'm not going to say the word on air, but the first word that she uttered on screen within the first minute of the film was a swear word. And they just went nutty over that. They thought, well... Now, Charlie was paid as a consultant. He got $5,000 extra on top of the $75,000 each they got for the film to act as a consultant.
So
Now,
who got 75,000
each? They all got 75,000
What, the Cray twins got 75,000 each?
for the film.
Really?
Yeah. It was a £250,000 deal. I explain how it came about in the book. They got 250,000, 75,000 each, and Charlie got 5,000 on top to act as a consultant. Now, Charlie was always the culprit as far as the twins were concerned. When anything went wrong, he always got the blame. If anything went right and Charlie had anything to do with it, he wouldn't get any credit, but he always got the blame if it went wrong. So when it was reported back, point one, that the mother had sworn, point two, that the film had them with machine guns. The third thing that was terribly wrong was that they had the murder of Jack the Hat McVitie happening on the same night as Cornell, but they were 20 months apart. And they had forgotten to say, well, not forgotten, they had omitted to say that Reggie's wife had committed suicide in between the murders. And this was one of the reasons that, or probably the prime reason that Reggie murdered Jack the Hat McVitie, which is that's probably another book. But Charlie always got the blame. So when they heard all these things about the film, Charlie got it in the neck, and they hated it. I promise you, they hated it. And the reason that it is so sad from a journalistic point of view is that there was so much in their lives that was big enough and exciting enough to put on the screen. You didn't need to exaggerate. Journalists know that if the story's good enough, you don't have to blow it up. Just give the facts. Well, they could have done that with a, and they didn't. They just made it a sensational load of rubbish, really.
I quite enjoyed it, I have to say.
Well, a lot did. My mate Dave Mears...
But then I didn't know... I mean, I wouldn't have known all of those things that you just said. I would have taken it... would I have taken it at face value? You never take a feature film at face value, I suppose. But it was, from a dramatic point of view, it worked.
Ian, there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions like you, who thought it was great. But believe me, it was a load of tosh.
Now, what's the truth behind Ronnie's sexuality?
Well, that's been well documented. He was gay. He told me that he was bisexual, but he was gay. There was no evidence.
And he would happily talk about it?
No. Well, he did to me on tape. It's on those tapes that you've got in front of you, because I did take a deep breath and say to him in Broadmoor, "Now, Ronnie, you did tell me the last time I was here about your fondness for little boys, or not little boys, for young boys, young men. What do you say to all those people out there who say that Ronnie Cray is gay?" He said, "I'm not, it's on the tape, I'm not gay, I'm bisexual." And he even said, "I went to a brothel once in Istanbul." And this is his humour, unintentional if you like. I said, what do you go there for? And he said, "Well, to have a bird, of course. What do you think I went there for? Me supper?" I mean, that on tape, that's quite...
and he did have quite a well-developed sense of humour.
Well, it was unintentional. For instance, Reggie wrote this book of slang. And on one of the 6 monthly visits to Broadmoor, he said to Ronnie, he knew that Reg had done this book of slang. He said, I've sent my book of slang to Ronald Reagan, because it was in the 80s when he was president. Ronnie said, quick as a flash, "Oh, did you? What do you think of it?" You know, he wouldn't think that they wouldn't have had a good chat about the book of slang. I said to him, do you think that you would have gone on as become still a free man if you hadn't murdered George Cornell in 1966? He said, "Oh no, they would have got us anyway." I said, "Oh really?" He said, "Yeah, they were after us. They would have done us for tax evasion." So I said, "Tax evasion? Were you evading tax?" And Ronnie, again, without realise what he was saying, said, "Well, we didn't pay no tax. I suppose you could say that." And I laughed, I chuckled, like you just did then. And he chuckled, and I said, "Well, did Reg pay any tax?" And he was laughing, and he said, no, he didn't pay it. And I said, "I won't ask you about Charlie." And we were chuckling together, and it struck me, because nearly every visit that I went to see with Ronnie, the Yorkshire Ripper was there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, cheek to jowl with
Sutcliffe.
Yeah, with the Bible. Cheek to jowl, reading the Bible together. And Ronnie would always move me away so that I didn't have to see. He didn't like people looking at But it just struck me funny that here I am in Broadmoor, chuckling over a little bit of humour with Ronnie, with a Yorkshire Ripper about 9 feet away. You know, it's just funny.
When you went to visit them, was there any point where you felt frightened?
Not once, no. Yeah, the editor of this book did ask that question. He said, maybe you should say in the foreword something about why you were never frightened, because I did say it not once. He said, well, you say that you had the odd row with Reg, which I did. He said, well, people might say you've got a death wish going in there and having a row with the Cray twin. Well, you've got to bear in mind that I went in as a working journalist. I was recommended by Maureen Flanagan, who knew the mother, who had known them as kids, and I was recommended. My trustworthiness was, you know, on the table for all to see, and I was not likely to turn them over. I wasn't likely to get a knock on the door.
But was there no part of you that felt, well, I have got to be a bit careful here because they will know people on the outside who could possibly...
Well, no, I never did, Ian. It was. I wasn't buddy with them. Yes, we would talk on the phone a lot, and I visited a lot, and we wrote a lot because the letters. Well, you can see. I know you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but the letters explain just what the relationship was like. Can I just tell you that Ronnie wrote, I think it was 19 letters in 21 days to me when he was suffering a mental breakdown, which gives you some idea of how close I was to them. This was in the days of 2 posts, when we had 2 deliveries, and I would have letters arriving on the same day, written the day before. 2 arrived on the same day. And one, he said very poignantly, "Robin, I must see you. I am not mad." Now, that's, you know, even now, that makes you just feel a bit... Because he was a tormented, troubled soul, you know. If he had been treated earlier, I don't think George Cornell would have... The mayhem wouldn't have happened. If he had been treated in the 50s, when he was first diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic, I think the whole course of history would have changed.
What did Reggie think of Myra Hindley?
Well, he hated the slut's guts, as he said, and the news editor on the People at the time was a good friend of mine, Tom Petrie, and he would ring me every Tuesday to say, in his words, "Have I got anything up my sleeve?" And I said, "Actually, I have," because that previous Sunday the People had published a letter, or they had done a feature on Lord Longford, saying that Myra Hindley ought to be released. She could make a nice secretary for someone. Reggie had come on the phone to me saying, "That slut, blah, blah." So I thought, I wonder if we can get a letter from Reg in the People. What Reggie Cray thinks of Myra Hindley, following last week's article in the People. Well, you would have thought that was easy, because I said to Reg, "I will speak to your go-between," which is a lovely woman up in Nottingham called I forget her name now. She was a little housewife who acted as a little secretary, and she fixed everything. I said, I'll ask her questions, or send her some questions. She'll give them to you. I'll interview you over the phone, and I'll do this from... Well, he came on the phone, and I said, right, we're ready to go. Did Stephanie King, her name was, did Stephanie give you the questions? He said, no, I don't need the questions. I've written a letter. And I thought, oh, God, you know, he's written a letter. I wanted stuff that was going to make the paper. He said, I want it printed in its entirety. And we went on and on and on about that. And we finally got it in its entirety.
Well, Robin, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of the hour.
That's a shame.
It is a shame, because I know you've got so many more anecdotes. It's Robin McGibbon who's written The Craze,
I've
Their
hardly
Life Behind
scratched the
Bars.
surface.